Video bandwidth and distribution of Talking Scuba is provided by Blip TV, the next generation television network for independent shows. Do your part by donating today by visiting TalkingScuba.com.
Underwater video camera housings and lighting is provided by Equinox Video Housings, the exclusive leader in underwater video housings for the professional, leisure, and sport divers.
Welcome to Talking Scuba, everybody's favorite dive show, where we talk about shallow, warm reefs, deep, cold wrecks, and everything in between. I'm your host, Molly Michelle.
And I'm Jim Norton. So, we're here at Long Lake, which is kind of where you got started here scuba diving.
Yeah, it is. And from what I've been told, this is actually a really great location for first-time scuba divers. But why exactly is that?
Well, it's real sandy bottom, so it's not mucky. We won't mess up our visibility. And you've got to go out almost a quarter of a mile before you get chest deep.
Oh, wow.
So there's no chance of you getting over your head or anything like that. So it's like working in a shallow pool. Works quite well.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about Stan Waterman.
Stan is an old-time diver. He got interested in diving in the 20s, 1920.
Wow.
And, of course, it took a long time for him to get into diving because it wasn't invented yet, basically.
Yeah.
So he got started in World War II doing a bit when he was in the Navy, and then it progressed from there. I believe it was about the 60s he got some really good footage of sharks. He was one of the first people to dive with sharks and actually get some excellent video. And it's still, by today's standards, it's still an excellent show.
That's saying a lot.
And the name of that show was Blue Water, White Death. We should take a look at some of this stuff from Stan Waterman.
Yeah, let's take a peek at that.
Now we're here with Stan Waterman at Our World Underwater in Chicago. He is a legendary diver. His skills in diving are only exceeded by his storytelling abilities. How did you really get started and interested in diving?
Well, let me see. That was so long ago that I have to reach back. When I was a nipper, which would have been back in the late 1920s. And I started reading, and my eye caught a book called Danger is My Business by Colonel John Craig. And I read it in bed under the covers with a flashlight because I wasn't supposed to be reading at night. And this guy's adventures in the sea would blow your mind. And I said, I'd like to be like that man. And you know what John Craig wrote about? He was a hard hat diver. And in this lurid chapter that I read, he was tending the safety lines for his buddy, a hard hat diver who was filming with a camera on a tripod down below, when suddenly the audio system was broken with a shriek of fear, then a gargle of death, and went silent. And Colonel John Craig, suited up, went down, and all he found was one lead shoe sticking up out of the sand, and the tripod with the camera overturned. Well, miraculously, there were no housings that I know of way back then for cameras. I didn't know anything about it. But it didn't leak, and they were able to develop the film, and what do you suppose that film revealed? As the camera was lopsided, it still caught this ghastly scene of a devil ray with its wings wrapped around his friend, carrying him off to his death. Well, I said, boy, that's the way to go. No, it was a long time ago, and to answer your question a little more seriously, I spent summers by the ocean, right on the shore, and up in Maine, also in two different places. And in Florida, my uncle had a patient who returned from Japan, and this would have been around 1934 or 3, and gave me a mask from the Ama divers, the Japanese lady divers, long before we had masks and so on, and gave it to me as a curiosity, and I put it on and went out from the beach at Palm Beach, out by the breaker, and opened my eyes, and, you know, we had nothing like that. No window before that, just goggles that bulge your eyes out, and they're focused with a plethora of all of the fish you see around little rock escarpments and reefs and so on, and it just blew my mind. That was the beginning. And then remember that also, coming into the war in that would have been 1942, the first masks and fins and snorkels came out, and I got them.
Yeah.
And was in the Navy during the war, was put in service or sent to Panama, and started diving with divers from the West Coast, ab divers, lobster divers, and really began to get into breath hold diving then before the aqualung.
Then, of course, the aqualung revolutionized diving in general, and then you were able to start taking some underwater video and exploring different things you'd never seen before.
Well,
even deeper.
You wrapped it up in one sentence.
So
you bet it was a mind blower when the name Cousteau first appeared in articles, having designed this air breathing device. It's hard to believe that it could be possible that you could go down freely without, of course, hard hat, which is all the commercial business knew. No, that was the big breakthrough.
And then now you've seen the evolution of gear over time. It makes it a lot easier for a broader range of people to dive. But can you tell us a little bit about maybe the filming equipment that you used to start out with?
Well, you saw my seminar.
Yes.
This morning. You never saw the camera, but this morning here at Our World Underwater, I did a seminal piece from way back when we were all shooting 16 millimeter film. Before the advent of television, it's hard for a young generation to think of a world without TV. But documentaries were the thing, unless you were going big league with 35 millimeter cameras for Hollywood and so on. And I had a wind-up Bolex, 3.5 minutes of shooting, and so on. And that's what I started out with. Lights, of course, to mean anything, had to be provided by surface generators and long catenaries of cables with cable attenders.
Wow.
With 1,000-watt Burns and Sawyer lights, that kind of thing. And then later, finally, into an Aeroflex with a 400-foot magazine. That meant 12 minutes of shooting, but slow films, film speeds. So this gradual arrival, high 8, remember, was a real breakthrough. And I still have some converted to DVDs, some of the early things I shot in high 8 that looked great, but better and better. And finally, of course, now the camera I use is a consumer product, Sony high-def camera, about so big. And I use a couple of different housings. I use a Gates housing, which is a manual controlled housing, and I use also a light and motion housing, which is all electronic. And the price on these housings, and this means a great deal to me because you don't get rich in this kind of business, is entirely viable. They give me these housings. That's the kind of price that I...
That's more reasonable.
I've had many housings over the years. They are both fine, have different systems, different kinds of optics, and I use them in different ways. One is best for macro, which I do a lot of. The other one, the Gates housings, has an extraordinary wide-angle dome port, all the way from 100 degrees all the way down, zoomed out and holding its focus to macro for the head of a shrimp.
Now, you've done a lot of filming over the years, and a lot of that filming has been done on the large pelagics and a lot of the apex predators, such as the great white sharks. One of your most famous documentaries, of course, is Blue Water, White Death, which eventually would inspire Peter Benchley's novels and subsequent movies and things. The negative side to that was that the sharks were hunted and stuff like that. But now you're working for this organization and trying to help save those sharks that were once hunted out of fear, almost.
There's an interesting diversity of sides on that, because all of those years that I was earning quite well shooting for the networks, and Peter Benchley and I did 14 shows for the American Sportsman, also ESPN. Sharks were the big thing.
Yep.
As you say, dangerous marine animals. And I like to say that sharks put my children through college. And they did. That's what they wanted. Blue Water, White Death was really itself, of course, a benchmark experience. The first time that we went outside of cages in deep oceanic water, far from shore, to film the big sharks. Peter actually had that, and Peter, incidentally, was my best friend. We lived 3 blocks away from each other in Princeton. Our families became very close, and we worked together for years, and I miss him very much indeed. But Peter was already inspired to write about sharks, and he told me that Doubleday, he was on President Johnson's White House staff, Peter Benchley. He was a speechwriter for Johnson, and wrote and was such a fine writer. Also a Phi Beta Kappa from Harvard, a remarkable man. And Doubleday asked him if he'd have lunch with him in New York and discuss possibly doing a book, and asked him if he had anything special he wanted to write about, and he said no. And they said, well, would you try sharks? That's how Jaws came out, the blockbuster that shook the world, made people scared about getting into their bathtubs.
And now you've become involved with Shark Savers, which is an organization that does what? Tell us a little bit about that.
There are a number of organizations. Wild Aid is a very big one. The Shark Research Institute at Princeton is another, focusing on whale sharks. I liked the way Shark Savers was working because they went directly to expending their energies and the monies we could raise to perhaps one of the most vital areas in which sharks are being decimated, and that is for the making of shark fin soup and the thinning of sharks. Something over 70% of the species are used for shark's fin soup, and they don't recycle. They aren't self-contained in their reproduction, so they are diminishing fast. And what Wild Aid, or rather Shark Savers, did was to put their money into billboards in China, big highway billboards with an icon, a sports icon, and I continue forgetting his name. He's the Chinese basketball player.
Yao Ming?
That's it, Zhao Ming, and who liked what we were doing, and there's Zhao Ming pointing at the cars as they come by, saying, "Say no to shark fin soup." And there's nothing like big sports icons to grab the affection of a people and make them think about it. So it's been very effective, and we're spreading onto Hong Kong, Taiwan, and trying to move it into Japan. So it's getting something done by focusing on one area that has been not only a big killer of sharks, but also a frightfully brutish thing, the cutting off of their fins and throwing them in live. I mean, offends everybody. So I work at that a great deal with them. Peter's widow, Wendy Benchley, is on the board with me, and we have people in the field. It's working. Hard to get money, as everything is today.
Yes. Now, you went to Dartmouth, and you really became educated there, and you became more of a storyteller. You were able to tell your stories through films and also through your book, Sea Salt. How did you get interested in telling those stories?
They say you have a propensity for blather. I had a good education, and I will always be indebted to the government and the GI Bill of Rights, because I couldn't have afforded the tuition at Dartmouth. But I had one term there before I went into the Navy, and they paid for the full education. And Dartmouth is one of the Ivy League colleges and top with its academics. And Robert Frost had a chair in the English department. I liked reading. I've always been a reader. I didn't ever really think of earning my bread by writing, but I learned a lot about writing. And majored in English. I majored in Shakespeare, and I loved it. It's hard to tell how that happens. It's certainly not genes. Nobody else in my family was there. And as for the storytelling, during the gumshoe days of lecturing all over the country with the 16-millimeter films, the only game in town, incidentally, before television, were travel lectures, travel logs, so on, Kiwanis clubs, in gymnasiums and schools and churches and so on. But it paved the way for expeditions in the summertime, which I gained the material. And standing up and talking when you are earning your bread by doing it is a great teaching tool. You begin to learn how to use your words, your syntax, and so on. And so the storytelling comes more easily because of that background. Now, Robert Frost was only at Dartmouth. He was at two other colleges in the Northeast for one term in each college, and I lucked out with that term. And we had a competition among the English majors to have the privilege of sitting with Robert Frost twice a week in the rare books room at the library by the fireplace and communicating with him. It was a competition, and you had to write a little essay about why I want to do this with Robert Frost, or deserve to, or something like that. And I knew that these smart guys would beat me to it. I wasn't very good at those things then, but also I knew that Robert Frost had been a guest of my Uncle George in Palm Beach when he was doing a lecture at the Four Arts, and that he'd acted very badly because my aunt told me she didn't like him at all. And so I said, I'm not going to try to compete with these guys. And I wrote a note and said, you were a guest of my uncle, Dr. Waterman. You behaved very badly, and I think you owe it to me. He had a sense of humor.
Yeah. How did that turn out then?
He said, so your Uncle Dr. Waterman's nephew. He said, what did you think of that wife of hers? God, isn't she a real 4-star bitch? And he said, yes, you're in. And that goes, and it's hard to answer the question, why
Sure.
do you get into storytelling? But the book writing actually had one major catalyst, and that was word processing. There is no way I would have gotten into just freestyle writing of essays and reminiscences and so on by longhand, or even with my old Underwood typewriter, because I can't spell, not smell. I can't spell worth a hoot. And the word processing, the whole thing opened it up, and I learned the touch system typing as a radioman gunner in the Navy. So writing became very easy, and that flow of being able to type as your thoughts begin to generate made it possible. I've never, as I read, I've just been reading now. I have a Kindle, and I take it everywhere. And I've been reading this new biography of Lawrence of Arabia. That's almost 2,000 words, and it was finished, and he left it behind when he was on a visit somewhere, and they never found it, and he had to start all over again when he got through leading the Arab armies and got back to Oxford. And the idea of longhand writing with a pen, quills, whatever they had, then no ballpoint, just appalls me. So word processing has opened up a whole different ball of wax, hasn't it? Yeah. Just a television has.
Right. Now, you're also famous for your eye patch now, and I think your daughter paints, she's got a nudibranch on there today?
Can't miss a nudibranch. And I have a bunch of them. They wear out sometimes, the elastic, and every Christmas she paints different things, and I have octopus and sharks and fish, and she has a raunchy sense of humor. All of my kids do. And this last one that she did for me, she painted a pair of Hooters on it. And they look sort of like eyes looking at each other. I don't wear that out in public very much. And my son, Gar, have a look at his website, garwaterman.com, is an artist. He's a stone carver. And he also went to Dartmouth and majored in French, because when I took my family to live in French Polynesia for that whole year back in '65, the kids, being so young and facile, learned French easily. And so it was kind of a gut course for him at Dartmouth. And when we went to his graduation, looking forward to your son being a comfort to you in your old age and supporting you when you're on the steps of the almshouse, we said, well, any job prospects? He said, Dad, I'm going to be an artist. My God, he'll be on his mother's left tit for the rest of our lives. But he's a success. He's made it. And we helped him by backing him up when he went to Italy for 3 months each year to learn the trade of stone cutting, and set up shop in an atelier plugged into the pneumatic systems where the stone carvers work there, and learned. And he's made it. Not big, but good commissions, he's solid. He's not hanging on to his mom at all. And he does a lot of marine subjects, big, beautiful shells, almost as big as this table, out of Algerian onyx. And he had a $50,000 commission from a billionaire in Spain for that.
Wow.
And, one or two of not that big will see you through. And he's doing very well. But right now, he's on a kick with nudibranchs. And he must have 10 now. And each one takes many, many weeks, also out of onyx from Algeria, from Turkey, and so on. And so they're very expensive because it's a high skill. But there's no market. I mean, they start, at $2,500 each, and some of them are $8,000. And I just brought one of these to one of my book signings at Beneath the Sea, just that had it set up there, and a lot of people were interested, but nobody nobody was going to shell out for an onyx nudibranch. So, like really fine artists, he of course does what he loves to do, and has commissions that ahead of time set up the subject that he's going to carve.
Well, Mr. Waterman, I really want to thank you for coming today to talk to us. We really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy the rest of your show, and we'll see you next year.
But wait a moment. I just got started. I have much more to tell you.
We can keep going.
Hey, thanks for having me, and put in a good word for shark savers. We need them, and we need a lot in the sea that is diminishing too fast. Thanks for having me with you.
Thank you. Great job.
You know how I was able to carry on this way? I get courage from the bottle. So I've been sitting in the men's room and put off a whole quart of rum.
You know this guy? He was doing the same thing. Thank you.
Oh, dear me.
Oh, good.
But you're saying you restarted the book.
Yeah.
Well, you know, that's why it went in the 33 printings, because the first part was a reminiscence about growing up in the Victorian era and way back in the 30s, mid-20s, and it was very fashionable then. And my father was fairly affluent and a businessman to have a foreign governess. And I had a cruel German governess who hit on me. And one time, and I don't remember this, but it must have been maybe 2 or 3 or something like that. She came in and she caught me sitting on the pot and playing with my weenie. Well, as German governesses did, this is typical of the German, whacked me around, said if I ever did it again, in this big laundry hamper that we had in the bathroom, was a little guy who would come out with scissors and cut it off and sew it in the middle of my back so I couldn't reach it. Well, that's the way I grew up. And in writing about this and how it aberrated on my sex life as I was finally reaching puberty, I said I started out by chasing girls backwards.
Well, thanks again for doing this. This has been tremendous for us. We really enjoyed it.
My pleasure.